In this episode, we look at why a group of 58 leading experts from around the world has proposed a new way to calculate and define obesity. We also discuss why several non-BJP-ruled states are opposing the draft UGC Regulations 2025. But first, we talk about the state of tourism in Goa. Hi, I'm Shashank Bhargava, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. For the past month, the Goa Tourism Minister Rohan Khaunte has been speaking out against social media influencers, whom he says are defaming the image of Goa by claiming that the tourist footfall has declined in the state.
At the same time, कोण येतलो उलयतलो वतलो कित्याक फुकट सोरो मेळना फुकट जेवण मेळना फुकट स्टे मेळना हे influencers are paid influencers onboarded by people to malign.
In a press conference earlier this month, he said that certain paid influencers have been onboarded to malign Goa and that he vows to take action against them. In fact, in another press conference last week, he actually presented data to counter claims that tourism has declined in the coastal state. But before we talk about what this data revealed, let us first understand exactly how this controversy began.
So it all started somewhere in November.
That's the Indian Express's Pavneet Singh Chadha, who reports on the state for the paper.
In early November, when there was a lot of social media outrage against the experiences people have felt in the last few months when they have visited Goa. So it started from one tweet that was made which claimed that tourism in Goa is down in the dumps and foreign tourists have abandoned Goa. And it led to a huge sort of outpouring where a lot of travelers who had come to Goa shared their own experiences related to a host of issues.
It's the first week of January and most streets of Goa are empty.
Goa tourism is on a decline. Tourists Southeast Asian countries को गोवा के ऊपर प्रेफर कर रहे हैं.
Goa has become expensive, from airfares to hotels to even taxis. So
this is where it started, and it led to a huge pushback from the government itself. Interestingly, the government's response to this social media outrage against the tourism policies in Goa was to file a complaint against the person who had tweeted, and the government said that this is all unverified data that is being shared online to malign the image of the state. So that is where this whole sort of argument started, where the government said that this information is being shared from a certain Chinese think tank, and hence the government feels that it's part of a larger narrative that there's a certain toolkit to malign the image of the state. And the tourism minister in recent weeks has harped up on the same, saying that all these influencers are paid and the ground reality is different. It's the opposite, that Goa is still the most preferred destination according to the tourists.
Right, and in a recent press conference, he actually came out with data to support his claims. So can you talk about this data and exactly what did it reveal?
Right. So 2 days ago, the tourism department had a meeting with all the industry stakeholders here. And the sort of main crux of that meeting was that they shared numbers of 2024 calendar year, January to December, as compared to the tourist footfall numbers the previous year in 2023. And the data that was shared by the government says that a total of 1 crore 4 lakh tourists visited Goa, which is higher than 86 lakh tourists that had visited Goa in 2023. So that's about a 21% hike in overall tourist numbers. When we sort of segregate the data between domestic and foreign tourists, the domestic tourists percentage has risen by 22% in 2024 as compared to 2023. And for international tourists, the percentage of footfall has increased by 3% in 2024. So the government sort of came out with that data and launched a tirade against the social media influencers, saying that, see, now we have the numbers. And as we have been saying from the start, that these social media influencers are painting a completely different image of the state. We have had record numbers when it comes to domestic tourists. So the number of domestic tourists is almost 1 crore.
I think putting this whole story together will plug the story of the decline. The people who try to put this word decline in Goa tourism, I think we'll be able to put a plug on this particular story. I'm happy to say that Goa is performing much better than the national average. Goa has got great.
This whole thing started by claims that international tourists have abandoned Goa. So the government says that post-COVID, that has largely been the trend across Asia. But even there, the government's response is that though Asia is still, slightly and slowly recovering from the pre-pandemic numbers, Goa has still shown a somewhat resurgence there. Although the numbers are still far off from the pre-pandemic numbers when it comes to international tourists. But the government says that, we've almost reached that 50% recovery when it comes to foreign tourists visiting Goa. And they also spoke about connected to newer destinations now, such as Poland, Kazakhstan, Central Asia, in a bid to sort of, lure more tourists. So the whole sense of that, conference and sitting down with stakeholders was to look at certain issues that are plaguing tourism, while at the same time sort of putting it in front to say that, this is the correct picture. And misleading data that was shared by social media influencers is now being plugged. These are the real numbers that we are showing you.
And apart from saying that foreign tourists have left Goa and that people are going to these other preferred international destinations, could you talk about what are some of the complaints that social media influencers and tourists have recently raised about Goa?
Right. So one of the common factors and a major pain point is about a certain taxi mafia that operates in Goa. So unlike other major cities or metros, Goa does not have the Uber and Ola like those private cab aggregators. And a frequent charge is that, even for say of traveling for a commute of 5 kilometers, you have to shell out sometimes 1,000 rupees, perhaps maybe more during the night time. And coupled with the lack of an adequate public transportation system, for tourists, it becomes a major problem. Now, there are no easy solutions to the problems when it comes to market forces. Taxis in Goa is more of a political problem because the taxi unions represent a vote bank. And in terms of vehicle ownership among the Goan households, the per capita vehicle ownership is very high. So there's a certain sense that, it is not really a problem for the locals per se, but tourists who come to the city naturally demand that there has to be a better way to work around the system. Another problem, which is like a subset of this taxi mafia, is also the behavior sometimes, like often these arguments lead to a lot of friction, especially in the, popular coastal belt of North Goa, places like Baga, Kalangut, where there has been a lot of over-tourism. So what happens in peak tourism is that the supply of taxis is limited. It remains constant. But because of the peak season, you have, those few taxis chasing a lot of customers. So which again distorts so much pricing. So pricing of taxis and taxi unions and that mafia operating is a major sort of issue that has been flagged by almost all tourists who visit Goa.
लाइफ का सबसे बड़ा स्कैम तब होता है जब आप फ्लाइट से लैंड करते हो एयरपोर्ट पे और आपकी फ्लाइट टिकट से ज्यादा महंगी आपको कैब्स मिलती है। जी हाँ, मैं बैंगलोर एयरपोर्ट की बात नहीं कर रहा हूँ, मैं बात कर रहा हूँ गोवा के नए एयरपोर्ट की, जो कि मोपा एयरपोर्ट है और ये काफी दूर है शहर से। एक्चुअली यहाँ पे कुछ भी नहीं है एयरपोर्ट के आसपास, लाइक लिटरली कुछ नहीं। और यहाँ पे आपके पास ऑप्शन दो ही बचते हैं, या तो आप प्राइवेट टैक्सी लो या तो आप गोवा माइल्स से कैब बुक करो। जी हाँ, फॉर द पीपल हु
The second problem is related to the prices. There's a charge that, the hotel prices and flight tickets have become very expensive over the years. And if you compare relatively, let's say somebody who's coming from Bangalore to Goa in December and they're paying, flight tickets for like 20,000. So they can instead, if you couple it with hotel expenses, a 4-day or a 5-day holiday in Goa is costing you around 70,000. Instead, you can, opt to go to Sri Lanka or say Thailand, to international destinations who post-pandemics have had some very friendly policies when it comes to visas. So that sort of comparison has sort of, set in the mind of a traveler to say that, is it friendly on my pocket to now go to Goa for this vacation, or should I instead go to a foreign destination? Another major point is cleanliness issue, which often gets hidden. The beaches are not as clean as they used to be. And there can be several factors related to it about, that the jobs being sublet to contractors or implementation. But another aspect of that is that there has been a lot of over-tourism in certain belts which contributes to it, as compared to say South Goa, where beaches are far more cleaner. It's a nuanced issue. It's not as simple to say that, international tourists are just abandoning Goa. The government's response is that you cannot compare Goa to an international destination. A state in one country cannot be compared to another country, or the larger feeling is that tourism is not a zero-sum game, that somebody who is this time going to Vietnam is also coming to Goa. It's the government feels that it's not that they're going to Goa at the expense of another country. So that is also one sort of argument that is in play right now.
And Pavneet, when it comes to high hotel prices or public transportation, has the government acknowledged these issues?
Right. So coming back again to taxis, the government does agree that it is a problem that needs to be addressed. In fact, some time ago, tourism minister was on record to say that we want all taxi cab aggregators to come in. But like I said, it's a larger problem and it's a political problem, that there has to be a consensus politically also to allow a competitive market to thrive. Now, that is not to say that Goa does not have cab aggregators. There is one company called Goa Miles, which in collaboration with the government does operate in Goa, but it has very few drivers. And again, the drivers who enroll on Goa Miles sometimes face a lot of animosity from the local taxi unions. But yes, to come back to your question, the government does acknowledge that it is a problem that has to be addressed. And in yesterday's meeting of Goa Tourism Board, this point was again raised by stakeholders. And there is talk of, regulating some taxi fares at, airports, railway stations and cruise terminals. And also to form a taxi action empowered committee, which will have officials from police, transport department, tourism department. So at least there is a certain sort of acknowledgement after all these debate on social media, which has led to some pondering from the department on this issue.
We wouldn't discount the issues raised by certain social media influencers. But as I said earlier, it is always a part of a tourism destination that they have their own challenges. And it is not only Goa to be pinpointed the way it was, but coming here and acknowledging the government, acknowledging the issues and wanting to put the things ahead, came with this stakeholders conclave today. Tourism is an industry and not only a department. And tourism, when we get a throwback, whether it is on the taxi, whether it is on the cleanliness, whether it is many things which get highlighted, or the touting, there are responsible departments which work collectively to ensure that we have the best of it for the tourist who comes here for our experience. We need to also...
And Pavneet, despite what the government says about social media influencers, the truth is that now a lot of places do rely on them. So is the government wary about sort of going after them this way, or alienating them?
So obviously, Goa being a tourism state where almost 16% of GDP directly comes from it, and if you add in numbers of allied sectors, almost 1/3 of the economy directly depends on tourism. And the perception of a state in the minds of a person, like we know that a lot of perception these days is shaped from what you see on social media. So naturally, the government is very sensitive about how the image is portrayed, but at the same time, it feels that the reality should be shown. So for instance, the officials of the record 2 days ago in the meeting was saying that, some of these influencers, they use the hashtag Goa to just get views on social media because negative perception sort of fits into the algorithm. And if it is trending that, Goa is declining, a sort of contrarian view, while the reality is different, does not trend. So the government is very conscious about the fact that you have to portray what is happening on the ground rather than, just taking a photo of an empty street during a weekday in the afternoon, which sort of has the potential to distort the reality. Another crucial aspect here is that the Goa government has also empaneled some of its own influencers. When I say own, I mean local influencers from Goa. To promote the policies of the government and, promote Goa as a tourist destination. And secondly, also to counter some of the misinformation that has been coming from these social media influencers who visit from outside the state. So that is also sort of one angle at play here, where the government feels that these social media influencers are not conveying the reality. And it's a very pertinent point that you have raised that, that in that entire ecosystem, they are now playing a very important role in shaping public opinion. So government is very conscious and sensitive about that.
And next we talk about obesity. On Tuesday, a commission set up by Lancet, one of the world's leading medical journals, proposed a new approach to defining and diagnosing obesity. This Diabetes and Endocrinology Commission was led by a group of 58 top experts from various medical specialties and countries. To know more about this commission and what their new approach aims to do, the Indian Express's Anonna Dutt joins us. Anonna, how do we define obesity right now, and why did this commission feel like there was a need to change that?
So currently across the world, the measure that is used to define whether somebody is obese or not is body mass index, which is the ratio of the weight to height. And if your body mass index or BMI is more than 30, you're considered to be obese and you're considered to be overweight. Less than 18 is called underweight. But there is a lot of challenge with, measuring just the height and the weight, because some people, might have abdominal obesity, which is especially true for Indians. So abdominal obesity is when there is a lot of fat deposition around the center of the body. And this fat is the one that also gets deposited on various organs like kidneys, liver, etc. So this is the one that is more harmful than, say, having a layer of fat just underneath the skin. And, so if you measure seemingly lean people can have this, central obesity, which puts them at risk of diseases like diabetes, hypertension, heart diseases, strokes, etc.
Is that what is called skinny fat?
Yes. So these people would at present not be considered to be obese or overweight, but they would suffer the effects of having that excess fat around their belly. Conversely, if there is somebody who's, working out quite a bit, their body mass index might be high, but that is because of muscle mass and not because of fat. And they would be actually in prime health, but still be considered overweight or obese. And, in those people, you don't really need to do any intervention to reduce the weight. So the current measure doesn't accurately capture the kind of treatment or intervention that you need for health reasons.
And talk about this commission that was set up by the Lancet. What is the new method that they are suggesting to define and measure obesity?
So the Lancet Commission is basically, a group of experts on diseases like diabetes and various other hormonal disorders. And they have looked at the evidence that has gathered so far on why, looking just at BMI might not be sufficient to, term whether a person is obese or not, especially because there could be people who, would be categorized as obese, but they do not have any symptoms, associated with that. And they don't really need treatment then. So the new guidelines that the Commission has come up with that looks at a few things in combination. So first of all, they will look at your body fat. You calculate your body fat percentage. The second thing that they will look at is muscle mass. The third thing is whether you have any sort of symptoms. So do you have shortness of breath? Do you have knee and joint pains? Have you had a heart attack because of obesity? So all of this would be considered while reaching a diagnosis of whether you're obese. So they have defined two categories: clinical obesity, people who have already had the impacts of this excess body fat, and preclinical obesity, where there is deposition on the organs and that there are some changes to the organs, but they've yet to face the consequences of it. So these are the two categories you would be put in depending on what symptoms you have and what is your body fat percentage, BMI, etc.
And BMI is pretty easy to calculate. It's just the ratio of your height and weight. You can do that anywhere. But here they're proposing to calculate body fat. So how exactly are they measuring that?
So measuring body fat is quite difficult because it's not a direct measurement. Like you can just measure your height with, against the wall or measure your weight on a weighing scale. But you can't do that always with the body fat. So there are indirect measurements. Of course, BMI acts as one indirect measurement of this. But there are also measurements like you can do a waist circumference. So for men, anything that's over 102 centimeter, for women 88 centimeter, that would be considered to be excess body fat. Then there is waist to hip ratio or waist to height ratio. There are three other measurements. So the Lancet Commission says that when we are looking at body fat, you have to look at two of these measurements. So either it could be BMI along with one of these three, like waist circumference, waist to hip ratio, or waist to height ratio, or it could be any two of the four. Or there is, of course, a direct measuring method like DEXA scan that can be done.
Right, and for those who might not know, DEXA scan is basically an X-ray exam. It's usually done for bone density, but it can be used to tell about the different components of your body. But, when we talk about obesity, can you tell us how big of a concern is it for India? Because in the past, we have spoken about diabetes, for example. Experts right now are concerned that diabetes is actually on a rapid rise in tier 2 and tier 3 cities, which was not the case a few years ago. So how much is obesity a concern?
So, obesity is a growing concern, not just in India, but worldwide. It's now considered to be a pandemic. And when it comes to India, there is an increase in obesity over the years. So, for example, if we look at the INDIAB data, it shows that in women over the last 3 decades, obesity has gone up from 1.2% to 9.8%. Similarly, in men, it has gone up by 4.9 percentage points in between 1990 and 2022. So, there is an increasing concern, and obesity is not a standalone disease per se, because obesity is a risk factor for a host of other diseases. You could have heart diseases, strokes, obstructive sleep apnea, liver diseases, you can have kidney diseases. All of these are linked to a person being obese. So it's a huge concern for India.
And in the end, we talk about the new provisions proposed in the UGC Regulations 2025. Several opposition-ruled states in the country have now objected to these new draft rules, which could give the Chancellor, who's typically the state governor, a bigger role in appointing vice-chancellors of state universities. Now, in case you don't already know who a vice-chancellor is, here's the Indian Express's Abhinaya Harigovind explaining the role.
The vice-chancellor is the topmost academic officer of the university, which means that he has powers to be part of the committees that appoint teachers, that appoint other academic staff. The Vice-Chancellor also convenes meetings of the Executive Council and the Academic Council of the university, which are the topmost decision-making bodies of the university. So the Vice-Chancellor is essentially the highest authority in the university. In terms of position, the Chancellor is above the Vice-Chancellor, except the Chancellor is more of a figurehead, in the sense that in the day-to-day functioning of a university, the Vice-Chancellor would have more powers in terms of managing the affairs of the university. The Chancellor, on the other hand, will have powers when it comes to things like appointing the Vice-Chancellor. Essentially, when it comes to appointments and making appointments, the Chancellor has powers.
Now, according to the UGC regulation of 2018, vice-chancellors were supposed to be appointed by a selection committee. Now, while the regulations did not specify who would be in that selection committee, it did say that the committee would shortlist 3 to 5 people who could potentially become vice-chancellors. The idea was that the chancellor, or in the case of central universities, a visitor, would select one person from this group.
So the 2018 regulations did not specify what the composition of the selection committee would be. It also did not specify who would constitute the selection committee. This is where the 2025 regulations are different, which is that it specifies that the chancellor, which in the case of state universities is the governor of the state, will constitute the selection committee, and it also specifies the composition of the selection committee. So the selection committee will comprise one nominee of the chancellor or the visitor. It will comprise one nominee of the UGC chairman, and it will comprise one nominee of the university's executive council or syndicate, which is the topmost decision-making body of the university.
Okay, so with these draft rules, it seems that the chancellor would have a much bigger role to play in who becomes the vice-chancellor. Could you talk about how different states have articulated their concerns about this?
So non-BJP-ruled states have raised an issue with this because they have already had long-standing issues with vice-chancellor appointments in their states, with appointments being pending in many of these states. So both Kerala and Tamil Nadu have so far objected to the draft regulations, saying that it is an attack on federalism and the rights of the state because it gives the governor or the chancellor greater powers in the appointment of the vice-chancellor.
And what specific issues have these states pointed to, and what are some of the contentious issues that have come up in the past because of this tussle?
There are two types of issues. One is of the procedure that has been followed in terms of the VC appointments, as well as the person itself who has been appointed. So in the case of Tamil Nadu, a very recent issue that was raised was of the selection committee that was constituted by the state to select the vice chancellor. In the case of state universities, did not include a nominee of the UGC chairman. So the Tamil Nadu governor R.N. Ravi had then written to the state government asking them to rectify this. So with this, the state and the governor have been in a bit of a tussle, and these appointments have remained pending now. So that is one instance. In another case in Kerala, the governor has objected to appointments of VCs on the grounds that some of them have been political. So in 2021, he had objected to the reappointment of the VC of Kannur University, Gopinath Ravindran, because back then he had said that the government had interfered in this appointment. So in addition to the problems that have been raised by Kerala and Tamil Nadu, Congress President Mallikarjun Kharge had also last week objected to the draft regulations, saying that this would allowing the governor more power in appointing VCs would mean that Sangh Parivar or BJP nominees will have more power in appointing VCs.
You were listening to Three Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was written and produced by me, Shashank Bhargava, and was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it, share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can tweet us at Express Podcasts and write to us at podcasts@indianexpress.com.